At Christmas dinner, they served everyone first except me. I didn't say a word, but I knew what I have to do. I sat at the far end of the long dining table, the one closest to the drafty kitchen door, the one nobody ever wants unless they are told to take it. I had not been told. I had simply arrived early, as always. Helped straighten the silverware, wiped down the counters Layla had already cleaned twice, and then, when no one noticed, quietly seated myself where I would be least in the way. The table was dressed in white linen and glittering with gold-trimmed china. Candles flickered against wine glasses filled to the rim. Everything looked perfect, except for the plate in front of me. Mine was plastic, not even the sturdy kind, the thin kind that bends under mashed potatoes and shame. Layla's voice sliced through the room, cheerful but sharp, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hold off on serving her," she said to the catering staff, barely tilting her head toward me. "Let's get everyone else fed first. Family comes first." Nobody flinched, not even Gray. My son, seated 3 places down, poured wine for his wife without looking up. George snorted. "She's still here?" Thought this might be her last Christmas. Laughter erupted. I smiled, softly, like I had not heard. Claire, bless her, shot a glance at me. But her mother whispered something sharp, and she looked down at her napkin, ashamed of her softness. The staff moved quickly, laying plates of herb-roasted turkey, creamy yams, and buttered green beans in front of everyone else. I was the last place untouched. A white, hollow plate and a folded paper napkin, the kind restaurants hand out with plastic forks. I glanced down at my lap, at the soft square of cloth I had embroidered for Claire. Her name was stitched in deep red thread, wrapped in little vines I had practiced on scrap fabric for weeks. It was tied with a green ribbon. I had made one for each of them monogrammed, personal, small things to say. I still noticed them even when they did not notice me. None of the packages had been touched. I used to make entire Christmas dinners from scratch. Stuffing from cornbread, not a box, gravy from bones and broth. I used to stay up late decorating gingerbread men with Claire. Now Layla bragged about how streamlined everything was thanks to catering. And me? I had become another centerpiece, something old, polished, and silent. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I looked down at my plate again. Plastic, hollow, just like the space they saved for me in their lives, convenient, disposable. "Cheers," Gray said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Layla added, beaming. George raised his cup of soda, eyes on his phone. I sat there, invisible. They talked about the company's new expansion. Layla spoke proudly of her latest spa trip. Gray boasted about quarterly growth. No one asked me how I was sleeping. No one asked if I had eaten. No one asked if I still missed my husband, though it was his chair, at the head of the table, now occupied by a man who had learned all his grace and none of his heart. I had not spoken all evening. Silence has a shape. Mine was the size of a mother who had poured everything into a house that no longer saw her as human. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but I would not let it fall. I reached for my glass of water, the only one not filled with wine, and drank it slowly, deliberately, as though it were champagne. When dinner began, and the forks clinked, I watched them eat. Not out of hunger, but out of habit, out of memory, out of mourning. It was not the food that hurt me. It was the fact that they had not even noticed I had not been served. Not a glance, not a question, not a crumb. I looked at my plastic plate, then at their laughter, then back to the cloth on my lap. I folded it, placed it gently back into my purse. I had spent hours making those, but something told me I would not be leaving them behind. I stood up, quietly. Claire noticed first, her fork pausing mid-air, but no one else did. I walked slowly toward the kitchen. Layla's voice floated up behind me. She probably forgot something. Again. I did not turn around. I did not explain myself. I did not say a word. But I knew exactly what I had to do. The day they asked me to move in, it was not out of concern. It was convenience. Gray said the house was too big for just the four of them. Said it would be better for me to be around family. What he meant was, childcare was expensive and my presence was free, so I came. I packed up my things from the little apartment Thomas and I had shared, the one I had tried to keep warm even after he was gone, and I moved into the guest room of my own house. The house that had once been mine, ours, but was now painted in colors I did not choose, filled with furniture I did not recognize. George was 4 at the time. Claire was just learning to read. Layla handed me a laminated schedule on my first morning there. Breakfast is at 7:30. School drop-off at 8:15. Pick up at 3:10, she said, tapping her perfectly manicured finger against the list. We usually do bedtime around 8:30. If you're tired, we can switch off once or twice a week. I remember nodding, too stunned to argue. That first week, I cooked every meal, did every load of laundry, picked up toys, read bedtime stories, patched school uniforms. Layla called it helping out, but I never once saw her lift a broom. She told her friends, laughing over wine, that she had the world's most vintage babysitter. Sometimes, when I would walk into the room, she would whisper just loud enough for me to hear, "And here comes the antique nanny." Gray did not defend me. He smiled, shrugged, or stayed silent. To his co-workers, he said, "My mother moved in after my dad passed. She is not all there anymore. We do our best to keep her comfortable." Comfortable. They let me sleep in the old sewing room once they turned the guest room into an office. The bed creaked. The door did not close properly. But I kept quiet. I always kept quiet. George grew up learning to mimic his mother's tone. By the time he was 8, he was already calling me the maid. Once, he spilled juice and barked, "Clean it up, Grandma. That's what you're here for, right?" Claire would whisper sorry. She would sneak me cookies and sit in my lap after dinner when no one was looking. She was the only one who asked about Thomas, the only one who remembered my birthday. But she was young, and children cannot shield you from the weight of being unwanted. What they never talked about, what they acted like never existed, was the reason any of them lived so comfortably in the first place. Years ago, when Thomas and I were just married, he had an idea to start a small local food company. Something organic, something rooted in tradition. But he hated paperwork, hated banks, hated filing, so I did it. I wrote the recipes. I tested the jars. I went to the clerk's office and registered the trademark under my name. The first product we sold? My pickled collard greens. The same ones my grandmother taught me to make when I was 12. We called it Georgia Gold. It sold out at every farmer's market. I built that label, that formula, that flavor. But after Thomas died, Gray stepped in. He had a business degree and big ambitions. He said it was time to modernize. I let him take the lead, let him rebrand. But I never signed anything. I never transferred ownership. No one asked me to. They just assumed I was irrelevant. One night, I overheard Gray on a call with an investor. My father created everything. My mother? She just made pickles. We do not use her stuff anymore. Just made pickles. I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of laundry I had folded for the 3rd time that week, and I realized something deep and cold had settled into that house. I was not seen. Not as a mother. Not as a founder. Not even as a person. Just as a presence to be tolerated, a tool to be used. And even that presence was starting to bother them. Once, I suggested changing the label back to the original design. Gray snapped, "No offense, Mom, but the old label looked like it came from the Depression era." Layla chimed in. "We are building a brand, not a museum." I nodded, smiled, said nothing. But I never forgot that the museum they dismissed still held the original deed, still had my name on it. And names, no matter how quietly written, do not disappear. We had celebrated 2 decades of Christmas there. 2 decades of laughter, of turkey and gravy. This 2024 dinner was supposed to be another warm family memory. But something had changed. The house was full of lights, and the smell of cinnamon candles that Layla insisted on ordering from some catalog, she said, made the house smell like wealth. It was Christmas Eve, 2024, and the dining room looked like a magazine spread, coordinated napkins, charger plates, name cards, tall centerpieces of plastic berries, and gold spray-painted pine cones. Everything had its place, except me. 2 days earlier, I had baked my famous pecan pie, the one Thomas always asked for, the one Claire once called better than candy. I made it quietly in the early morning, while no one was awake, chopped the pecans by hand, rolled the dough just the way my grandmother taught me. I left it on the counter, covered in foil, cooling with a little note beside it. Merry Christmas, love, Grandma. That afternoon, I found it in the trash. Layla did not even look up when she said, "The caterers are handling dessert. We don't need extras." I said nothing, just nodded. On Christmas Eve, before dinner began, I placed 2 small cloth-wrapped packages on the edge of the table, one for George, one for Claire. Inside were hand-stitched bookmarks, each one bearing their initials and a design chosen just for them. George's had tiny basketballs embroidered in the corners. Claire's had little books and stars. I had worked on them for weeks, threading needle after needle by lamplight, even when my hands ached. They were quiet gifts, not expensive, but full of time. Claire saw them first. She smiled and picked hers up, unwrapping it slowly like she was afraid it would break. Her fingers traced the threads, eyes soft with something I had not seen in a long time, recognition. George did not touch his. He laughed. "Is this a rag?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Layla leaned across the table and plucked Claire's from her hands. "We do not need to pretend, sweetheart," she said, folding the cloth. "Let's not encourage sentimentality. It just makes everything awkward." Claire looked down at her plate, cheeks burning. I kept my eyes on my glass of water. Dinner was served with flourish. Layla clinked her glass for attention and welcomed the guests' friends from Gray's company, neighbors with perfect hair and wine-colored lipstick. Plates of duck and truffle potatoes were laid out. The children were given sparkling cider and champagne flutes. Laughter floated like mist above the table. I tried to stay small, to eat slowly, to not disturb the curated joy. Halfway through the meal, George reached across me dramatically and knocked over his glass. The cold water spilled right into my lap. He blinked, all fake surprise. "Oops," he said. "Guess you needed to wash off some of that dusty past." Someone at the table laughed. Layla tried to hush it, but her smile betrayed her. Gray did not look up from his plate. Claire reached for a napkin to help. Layla stopped her. I dabbed at my skirt with the corner of my own napkin. My hands did not shake. My eyes stayed dry. I had learned long ago that tears in this house would not earn you mercy, only more silence. When dessert came, a waiter carried in a 3-tiered tray of tiny pastries. They looked like jewelry, not food. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "I wish we had your pie instead." I smiled. Just enough. After the coffee was poured, after the toasts were made and the compliments to Layla repeated like a chorus, Gray cleared his throat. The room quieted. Everyone leaned in. "I've been thinking," he began. "This might be a good time for some changes. Layla and I are planning to remodel the basement next year. Maybe add a gym, some space for ourselves." I nodded, unsure where this was going. Gray continued, voice casual. "And maybe it's time to consider other options for you, Mom. There's a really nice assisted living place just 20 minutes from here, with medical staff and activities and," Layla cut in, "and peace. For everyone." They looked at me like they expected gratitude. I set down my fork. The room was silent, but not uncomfortable. They were used to me being quiet, used to my stillness. I looked at Gray, my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep during storms, the man who now saw me as furniture that needed to be moved to make space for weights and treadmills. I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply picked up my plastic plate still not replaced from earlier and stood. Claire's eyes followed me. No one else looked up. I walked toward the kitchen. My skirt is still damp, my knees aching. "Behind me," someone said. "She always gets dramatic around the holidays." But I was not being dramatic. I was remembering. And in that moment, I remembered everything. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after the Christmas dinner. The room was dark, save for the soft amber glow of the hallway light leaking through the crack in the door. I could still hear laughter downstairs, dessert plates clinking, the sharp tone of Layla's voice rising above the others, animated and pleased with herself. In my lap was the cloth Claire had tried to keep. I had taken it back, not to be petty, not out of pride, but because I knew now, with a kind of icy clarity, that whatever pieces of myself I gave them would be discarded, misunderstood, or stolen. I needed to protect what little was left. I reached beneath the bed and pulled out the wooden box. I had kept it hidden under a folded quilt for more than 2 decades. The hinges creaked when I opened it, and the familiar scent of cedar drifted upward. Inside, neatly stacked, were letters, photos, and one large envelope, aged at the edges, its seal worn but unbroken. The letter was from Katie. I had not read it in full since the day she died. I had done as she asked, delivered it to Thomas, but she had given me a copy, just in case, she had whispered, smiling weakly from her pillow. I had tucked it away, too afraid and too respectful to use it. Now, I unfolded it with steady hands. The handwriting was shaky but still legible. To my husband Thomas, and to whom it may concern, I, Catherine Lee Harrington, being of sound mind and failing body, hereby declare this letter as my final amendment to any and all legal documents concerning my personal estate and holdings. She went on to name me Susan Margaret Langley as the sole recipient of her private savings account, personal land shares on the East property, and all remaining stock shares in Harrington Food Holdings that were in her name alone. At the bottom were 2 signatures, hers and Dr. Leland Rhodes, her attending physician at the time. Below that, another signature, Miss Carla Bennett, a nurse practitioner who had witnessed the signing. I stared at the names for a long time, blinking hard. How many times had I been told I was nothing, that I was a thief, that I had snuck into a family that never wanted me? And yet here was Katie Gray's own mother, writing in her own hand that she trusted me, that she chose me. I placed the letter beside me on the bed, then pulled out another paper, a carbon copy of a delivery notice from 1999. It was addressed to me, forwarded from our old house in Savannah to the home Thomas and I had moved into later. I had never seen it arrive, but someone had signed for it, Gray. I remembered the week it was dated. Gray had been visiting. He came home early from college after a breakup. He was angry, sullen, and prowling around the house like a storm cloud. He had taken the mail from the porch that day. I remembered that clearly. Said he would sort it, and now I knew what he had sorted. I took a breath and reached for the phone. Carla Bennett's number was still in the box, written in Katie's old spiral notebook. I doubted she would even be alive, let alone reachable. But when the phone rang and a calm, familiar voice answered, my heart clenched. Miss Bennett, I said quietly. This is Susan Langley. There was a pause. Oh my goodness, she said. Susan. I still remember Katie asking me to sign that letter, said you were the only one who earned it. I never knew what happened after, I told her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, well, sweetheart, maybe it's time the truth has its turn. I called the law office next. The number had changed, but the receptionist recognized the name. Mr. Holbrook is retired now, she said, but I can give you his direct contact. An hour later, I sat with the phone pressed against my cheek, listening to the voice of a man I had never met, but whose name I had read in Katie's letter. I remember the file, he said. I sent the confirmation to your home. Never heard back. A few months later, your son called Gray, I believe, and told me you were declining all rights to the inheritance, that you wanted no involvement, no money. I archived the file based on that. I did not speak. My silence said more than I could, he continued, voice softer now. Looking back, I see now. That call did not feel right. But I was younger, less suspicious. I should have confirmed it directly. He paused, then added, I still have the original letter in storage, and all the notarized attachments. If you want to reclaim what is yours, Miss Langley, I can help. I looked down at the copy in my lap, still crisp, still undeniable. Yes, I said, it is time. And I meant every word. They thought I had forgotten everything. They mistook my silence for confusion, my stillness for decay. But I remembered. Every recipe, every document, every signature, and most of all, I remembered what was mine. After the call with Mr. Holbrook, I stayed up most of the night at the kitchen table, going through the old accordion folder I had kept hidden in the bottom drawer of the antique chest. It was the one piece of furniture they had not touched, too heavy to move, and, in their words, too ugly to match the modern aesthetic. Inside were papers no one else had bothered to look for. The original business license Thomas and I had filed, the trademark application for Georgia Gold, our first label, approved and stamped by the state, the official copyright registration on the recipe I had written in my own handwriting, submitted and verified 25 years ago. All of it was still in my name. I laid them out in rows across the table, straightened the corners, matched dates with documents, built a timeline only I could understand because I had lived it. I pulled out the company's current website. They had rebranded it a few years ago. Harvest 44, they called it, now slick, modern, no trace of the roots. But when I scrolled through the product list, I stopped cold. There it was, pickled collard greens. Same ingredients, same ratio. Even the same line from my original label, a taste of Georgia in every jar. They had taken my work, repackaged it, sold it under a different name, but it was mine. I called the intellectual property attorney listed on Mr. Holbrook's referral. Her name was Vanessa Trent, and her voice was calm, deliberate. "Miss Langley," she said after I explained, "I deal with cases like yours more often than you think. Families assuming a woman's work does not need protecting because she never made noise about it." I emailed her scanned copies of everything. The trademarks, the recipes, the original branding. 2 days later, she called back. "Your case," she said, "is airtight." She explained that since I was still the registered owner of both the formula and the original trademark, and since there had been no legal transfer or licensing agreement, Gray's entire operation was using intellectual property without consent. "And using a modified brand based on the original," she added, "means you can go after them for derivative infringement." I was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to destroy him," I said. "I just want the truth back." She paused, then said gently, "Sometimes, the truth feels like destruction to people who built their lives on lies." I asked her what would happen next. "If you approve, we will issue a cease and desist," she said. "They'll have to pull the product immediately. If they want to continue using the recipe or branding, they will have to pay licensing fees, and those can be backdated. And if they refuse? Then," she said, her voice firm, "we can file for an injunction, and if you're willing to go further, sue for damages." I looked at the jar of greens sitting in the pantry. Claire had picked it out once at the grocery store, said she liked the taste. I had said nothing then, but now? Now, I saw it for what it was, a symbol of what they had stolen. Not just a recipe, not just a brand, my history, my work, my voice. "They changed the label," I said. "But it still tastes like me," Vanessa replied, "and they are about to taste what it feels like to be sued by you." We began drafting paperwork. I found more. Emails I had printed from years ago where Gray had thanked me for helping launch the family business. A marketing flyer from 2003 with a photo of me smiling next to the original stall at the farmer's market. Photos of Thomas and me holding up the first printed jars. They had wiped me from the story, but I had kept the proof. By the end of the week, the documents were filed. Vanessa called me one more time. "Are you ready, Miss Langley?" I closed the folder and nodded. "Yes," I said. "Let's bring the house down." The courtroom in Georgia was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Clinical, detached. As if the walls themselves had learned not to care. I sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, hands folded in my lap, dressed in the same navy coat Thomas bought me on our last anniversary. It still fit. That morning, I had buttoned it slowly, deliberately, like putting on armor. Gray was already seated across from me. He did not look at me. Layla was next to him, flipping through documents as if she understood any of it. Their lawyer, a young man with too much gel in his hair and not enough respect in his eyes, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he began, We question the mental capacity of the plaintiff. Miss Langley is nearly 80. There is concern that she may be under external influence or experiencing memory issues. Gray nodded in agreement, hands folded like a grieving son. My mother, he said solemnly, hasn't been herself for years. We've taken care of her. We never expected this hostility. I did not speak. My lawyer, Vanessa, stood calmly. Let's proceed with the exhibits, Your Honor. She began with the documents. The will, Katie's final amendment, complete with the signatures of her attending physician and the witness. She laid out the certified trademark papers, the copyright for the original recipe, dated and verified. She submitted email correspondences, marketing material, and even an IRS document listing me as the founding officer of Georgia Gold, the predecessor of Harvest 44. Then, she pulled out a flash drive. Your Honor, she said, this is a video recorded by Catherine Lee Harrington 3 months before her passing. It was submitted with her estate file and kept by her nurse practitioner until recently. The judge allowed it. The courtroom screen came to life. There she was, Katie Frail, in her hospice bed, but alert. Her voice was slow but steady. If you're watching this, she said, I've passed, and there's likely been questions. I want to be clear. I trust Susan Langley. I am leaving her what I leave not because she asked, but because she earned it. None of my children visited. None paid for my care. Susan did, with her time, her money, her heart. And Thomas, he'll need someone when I go. She is the only person I trust. The room was silent. Gray stared at the table, unmoving. Layla looked pale. The judge turned to me. Miss Langley, would you like to make a statement? I stood. Slowly. My knees creaked, but my voice did not. I have nothing to prove, I said. I don't need anyone to believe me. I just want it known. I never forgot. Not who I was, not what I did, and certainly not what they did. I looked at Gray. You can paint over a wall 100 times, I said, but the cracks will still be there. He said nothing. The judge nodded. The evidence is clear. The estate assets outlined in the will legally belong to Miss Langley. Furthermore, the intellectual property in question remains registered under her name. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. I sat back down. Gray's lawyer whispered something to him, probably about appealing. But there was no fight left in him. His hands hung limp at his sides. Layla did not even pretend to smile anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, cameras flashing. I did not stop. I did not wave. Justice does not need applause, only air. I stepped outside. The December air hit my face, sharp, honest. I breathed it in like it was the first true breath I had taken in years. The ruling was final. The court awarded me full legal ownership of the eastern property. Katie had left the same land Gray had once promised to investors without a second thought. The same shares that gave me controlling interest in the company he built on my work. And worse for him, the court found that Harvest 44 had knowingly used copyrighted material registered to me without permission. Their business license was revoked. Operations ceased within the week. Vendors pulled out. Supermarkets removed jars from their shelves. Clients demanded refunds. Employees walked out. Layla called it sabotage. I called it justice. But I did not throw them out of the house, not right away. No, that would have been too merciful. Instead, I consulted a real estate attorney and had the house appraised. Then I informed Gray and Layla in writing. If they wished to stay, rent would now be market price plus 25% for retroactive occupancy. They could not afford it. They packed in silence. No fights, no outbursts, just boxes, taped hastily, and the sound of broken pride shuffling out the front door. They moved to a small apartment above a shuttered dry cleaners downtown. Claire went with them. For now, I rented the house to a quiet couple from Atlanta professors. No children, respectful. The woman liked gardening and offered to keep up the yard. I liked her immediately. Gray? He got a job as a delivery driver, a far cry from his CEO title. I watched him once, from the porch, hauling crates of beverages into a chain store. He looked thinner, older, but I did not speak. I had already said all I needed to. Layla, ever the tactician, tried once more. She sent me a long letter, pages and pages full of vague apologies and claims of misunderstanding. At the end, she asked if we could reset. I mailed her back the plastic plate from that Christmas Eve, wrapped it in a gift box, included a small handwritten note. This plate is still available, but your seat is not. I never heard from her again. George, stripped of any illusion of inheritance, left for California, said he wanted a fresh start. I suspect he just wanted to escape the embarrassment. I did not stop him. Some lessons are better learned far away. Claire stayed in touch. She called more often, sent postcards from campus. I found one in the mail last week, pressed flowers taped inside, her handwriting curling like a vine. She had been accepted to a prestigious liberal arts college, full scholarship, thanks to the new endowment I established, the Katie and Susan Legacy Fund. For daughters forgotten, for women erased, she was its first recipient. On the day she moved into her dorm, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "You always saw me," she whispered. I smiled, my voice steady. "And now the world will see you." Sometimes, when the sun slants just right across the porch, I sit with a glass of sweet tea and close my eyes. I hear the laughter from Christmases long gone. I see Thomas leaning against the doorframe, Katie humming softly in the kitchen. They are gone, but I am still here. And I am not invisible. Not anymore. They used to serve me last, as if I were the least. Now I serve justice first. The day I stepped into that courtroom, I thought I would feel afraid. I thought the weight of years of silence, of being overlooked, of being dismissed, would hang heavy on my shoulders. But when the double doors opened and the bailiff called my name, all I felt was calm. I wasn't walking in as their mother, or their burden, or their unpaid babysitter. I was walking in as a woman who remembered. The courtroom was quiet, cold, sterile, but I could feel the eyes on me, the court reporter who looked surprised when I took the stand without hesitation, the judge who raised her brows as I laid out each document with steady hands, and Gray, who couldn't meet my eyes. I wore navy blue that day, not black. I didn't want to look like a widow. I wanted to look like a survivor. When I took the stand, they asked simple questions: my full name, my age, my relation to the defendant. Then they asked what my role had been in the founding of the company. I didn't speak right away. I looked over at the Harvest 44 logo printed on the folders at Gray's table, so polished, so professional, so clean, and built on a lie. "I created the original recipe," I said. "By hand. In my kitchen. Before there was a company. Before there was even a name. Did anyone else assist you in developing it?" "No," I said. "Thomas helped with taste testing. He believed in it. But the formula, the method, that was mine." The lawyer nodded. "And who filed the original paperwork?" "I did," I said. "Because my husband didn't trust the internet. Said I was the organized one." There were chuckles from the gallery. Even the judge smiled. Then came the evidence. Document after document, registered trademarks, letters, emails, photos. Then the video. I hadn't seen it in years, not since Katie died. Hearing her voice again made my breath catch. She looked so small in that hospital bed, but her voice was clear, intentional. "I'm leaving Susan what I leave because she's the only one who never left me." I looked over at Gray as it played. He stared at the floor, couldn't lift his head. Layla gripped his arm, her jaw clenched. I remembered how she used to smirk when she talked about the old woman upstairs. There was no smirk now. When it was my turn to speak freely, I stood. My hands did not shake. "I never wanted this," I said. "Not the courtroom, not the fight. I wanted peace, a family. But sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's permission." I looked at Gray. "You took what wasn't yours, my work, my name, my story, and you erased it like it never mattered." The judge asked if I had anything else to say. I thought for a moment. Then I said quietly, "I don't need you to believe me. I just need you to know I never forgot, and I never will." The room was still. Even the bailiff didn't move. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But the weight of those words, years of being ignored, dismissed, overlooked, landed with more force than any scream could have. The judge nodded slowly. She turned to Gray's team. "Unless there is evidence to contradict this testimony," she said, "I believe we are done here." There wasn't. The gavel fell. I had won. But more than that, I had been heard. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast. No reporters that day, no crowds. Just a quiet breeze and a truth finally spoken. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't happy, but because justice isn't about joy. It's about balance, correction, restoration, and I felt restored. I took the long way home that day, passed by the old farmer's market where we first sold jars of pickled greens for $5 each. I parked the car, walked along the gravel path, and stood in the same spot where Thomas once kissed my cheek and said, "We're building something here." He was right. I just never knew it would take this long to get credit for it. Before I left, I bought a single jar of honey from a local stand. The vendor, a young woman, looked at me and said, "You look like someone with a story." I nodded. "Oh, honey," I said softly. "You have no idea." And I walked away, upright, unbroken, and finally, undeniably seen. They used to call me invisible. Now, they call me victorious. But I do not tell my story to boast. I tell it because too many women like me, mothers and caregivers, founders and forgotten wives, have been erased, silenced, or rewritten by the people they loved most. This time, we write our own endings. If you felt seen in this story, if you know someone whose truth has been buried for too long, or if you believe that justice, no matter how long it takes, is still worth fighting for, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where every voice echoes, every story heals, and every forgotten woman gets the chapter she deserves. We are just getting started.